Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Creatives of Windsor podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Sherdown, and today I'm sitting down with local artist Carlos Anthony. Carlos, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
For sure. So I guess what I want to start with is your current project, the big project, kind of the reason why we're doing this, I guess. And that's your new play coming up, The Prince of Freedom.
Price
Price of Freedom. What is... what is it? Go.
Yeah, so The Price of Freedom, it's this project that I was commissioned to write from ACT, which is the Art Collective Theater. This project is in celebration of the Amherstburg Museum's 50th anniversary. Just to kind of go into the project, it's about John Anderson, who is this man who was an enslaved person. He fled Missouri after murdering a bounty hunter and slave owner, and then he came to Canada. And while he was here in Canada, after being here for several years, he confided in someone who he had trusted. They snitched on him. And then when they snitched on him, he went to jail. And this project is about the court case that goes on to actually change our laws as far as how we're governed by the British and our relationships with the Americans just before the Civil War. And I wrote it as as a spy thriller because I felt typically transatlantic slave stories are always triggering and traumatic, and they've made me feel real uncomfortable watching them. I don't know about everybody else, but I just felt watching World War stories or stories about war, there's always this spy component. And we have secret societies with the Underground Railroad, with the Prince Hall Masons. And I was if this was written under that lens, it would be more engaging. And I feel people would actually want to dive in a little bit more about the history. And just being a Black Canadian, I feel other Black Canadian youth would be a little bit more proud, rather than, at least from my experience, when I was in elementary school or even in high school, being, one of few Black kids at the school, whenever they talked about slavery, all the other kids would look at me as if I was an enslaved person. So I'm really excited about this project. I'm doing 4 fight scenes. I'm jumping off a boat. I'm jumping off a train. It's a story where the protagonist doesn't die in the end. So I'm really excited about it.
So when doing a play, I have so many questions, but when doing a play that is based, because you would say it's based on the true story, right?
100%,
Did you change much or add things, or not really?
Well, we were working with the Amherstburg Freedom Museum, and we worked with Elise Harding Davis, who is an Order of Ontario recipient. It's the highest honor that you can receive as an award in this province or in any province. And they made sure that this story was as authentic as it could possibly be. So yeah, it is as close to the story as much as possible.
So did you have to do a lot of historical research? Yeah.
Yeah, I had to read there's a couple books I had to read. There were articles that I read. They've been great because there's other stuff that I didn't have access to that they were able to give me access to. Cool. And it's just been an incredible experience.
Did you have to do a lot of your own fact checking to make sure things were correct when you're writing the script and the dialogue and stuff?
I did, but then they also went ahead and double fact checked me.
Nice.
So
feels good, eh?
Yeah. Well, Elise is she's a 7th generation Black Canadian. So her parents came, or not her parents, but her family has been here since 1792, I believe. Whoa. It is. Yeah. So, and her father was a Mason, her grandfather was a Mason. So as far as learning about the Masons, she was the closest thing as far as making sure I had the truth as far as everything.
Wow. Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So the main character of this play, is that who you're playing?
Yeah. So his slave name was Jack Burton. And then his freedom name was John Anderson, but he went through a number of different aliases because at that time you had to continue to change who your identity was. For sure. I really like a spy thriller, right? No one could really know who you were. Otherwise it meant you being captured, you being tortured, and then, eventually death.
I saw on kind of your write-up or bio that a lot of your work is Black themed, and is that true?
Yeah. I just for me, I guess like how I started writing, just to, I guess, give you some insight. It was only like just maybe like 5 years ago. I was working at like a glass manufacturing plant in Ontario. And it was a very abusive, like psychologically abusive environment. There were people that worked there that had like the Confederate flag tattooed on their arms, stickers of it on their locker. There were like racial slurs. And I just didn't feel like I had a safe space at work. In my personal life, I was going through a lot with my ex, who I had a child with, and then my wife now. Like things were like really rocky, and I thought that I was going to go through a divorce, and I was getting these like tremors in my hand, and I was having a really hard time like emotionally regulating. So I went to go see this naturopath, and then from meeting with him, he like ran these tests. It kind of felt like a little bit like voodoo. He would turn off the lights and put my hand up, and then turn it back on, and it was just kind of crazy. But he was like, your trauma from your childhood is actually like seeping out. And that's the reason why you're in the state that you're in. Plus you're on burnout, because at the time I was working like 16, 20-hour days. And he's like, you need to start writing about like your trauma. So that's kind of how it like started. And then with me like not necessarily believing in myself as an artist at the time, I started collaborating with other people, thinking that, I would write their story, they'd get on, and then they'd put me on. And that's when I realized that I got to be my own savior. So I started like creating like my own stuff. Shades of Black was like, I guess like my calling card to the world is here I am, this artist.
That's your first novel, right?
Yeah, my first novel, because I was doing ghostwriting before.
Cool.
But yeah, it was my first novel, global student reading list, national bestseller. And then from there, like I kicked off last year's Windsor International Black Film Festival with one of my films. And I mean, I've partnered with CBC. They actually helped me build my first production company. And I mean, I've just been building off of the momentum ever since.
Wow, that's awesome. Every time you talk, I have 6,000 more questions that stem out of it. And there's so many ways I can go right now. It's really cool to hear that you started making art based off of like your personal feelings, especially these like deep emotions, even maybe some negative emotions. Like that's where like good art comes from, right? Art doesn't come from being like comfortable and happy. It might take you there, but good art doesn't come from there. And that's really cool. And that's probably why your work has been successful so far. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I just try to like keep it real. I allow myself to be like completely like vulnerable. When I was writing Pretty Boys Don't Cry, which was basically like this commissioned short story piece that led me to getting my first book deal, like I was crying as I was writing like some of those chapters, because I was like literally like reliving some of my childhood trauma. And it's really sad, but in like Caribbean households, a lot of like how our parents discipline us is like diluted versions of like how our ancestors were treated as like slaves or as enslaved people. So yeah, a lot of it was really hard. And even in this project, like we've had a couple rehearsals where like I was just having like a hard time like emotionally regulating. Like I was just like crying. I was like, guys, I just need a moment, because there's like a scene where like no one's being like whipped in the play, but he's like whipping the floor, and I'm supposed to like react to it. And then there's this part where he has the whip and it's like close to my head, and I'm like sitting in the chair on the stand in the courtroom. And for me, it brings back to like things that happened to me in my childhood as far as like abuse. So there's been times where when I wrote this play, it wasn't for me to act in it, and I had no intentions in acting. Okay. Right? So it was really just, cathartic, therapeutic. I'm going to write this, release it, somebody else gets to act it, and then I just get to kind of see how everybody else like, processes it, enjoys it, what their takes are on the message. So for me, like actually being it and then trying to like separate myself from the character, even though it's a different time, but there's just certain experiences that he had that I had like wrote from my perspective traumatically. And yeah, it's just been real authentic. It's been real, almost too real. And I've just been working on separating the two.
I think that if you, do you think that if you had known that you were going to be the one playing, you would have written it different? Do you think it's probably better because you didn't think you were playing it, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I just don't know how to write without speaking from like personal experience. Writing is really like healing for me. So even if I'm like ghostwriting for other people's projects, like my fingerprints are all over there because you can see like my stories, you can see my humor when I'm breaking up the tension. And I like to write with like suspense and like thriller. I'm that person that wants to make everything like a page turner if it's a book, or if it's a TV show. Like, I don't want you to go for a commercial break. I want you to stay, like, you know, like Scandal and like anything Shonda Rhimes has ever written, or even like Succession, which is like one of like my favorite shows that came out a few years ago.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Okay, I want to get into your book and I want to get into your film you just mentioned. But before we do that, let's get back to The Price of Freedom. Has this person's story ever been told before?
It hasn't been told before the way that I'm telling it.
Cool.
There is a novel that was written like in the 1800s. I can't remember what the person's name is. I'm actually writing a contemporary version like of his life story. So it'll be like, I'm writing it as like creative nonfiction because I like the spy thriller component. And for me, my whole thing is I like to educate people while I'm entertaining them. So that like hiding the vegetables type of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I'm forgetting the rest of your question.
No, I was just asking if his story had been told before.
Yeah, so there are some like newspaper articles. I believe something was there on like TVO. I believe it's Robert Bode who actually talked about like the actual case, because at the time this was the trial of the century at the time. Right? Like Canada was in the hot seat because of our relationships with the Americans, kind of similar to now. And then there was just like a lot of pressure. They wanted this man extradited because they wanted to make an example out of him, because at the time, like, black people are not getting away with like murder.
The states wanted him extradited.
Yes, the states wanted him returned back.
Got you.
Right? And Canada was like, we don't know if we really want to do that. And in the project, he actually gets found guilty first, and it actually takes a couple of appeals before he's actually set free.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, we add that component to like add that suspense. But it's just an incredible story, and I just know everybody that watches it is just gonna love it.
Yeah, it sounds so interesting. I love history. Especially things that are, I guess, local too, is even better. Where exactly was the court case being held? Like, was it around here?
So the court case was actually in Toronto, but before, like when John Anderson actually came to Canada, he was here in Windsor, which was at the time known as Sandwich.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was the Bibb family, Henry and Mary Bibb, who ran this newspaper called The Voice of the Fugitive. So he had stayed with them. Mary had taught him how to like read and write. Henry was her husband. He was doing like speaking engagements, but there was like a bond because Henry was actually like an enslaved person before. Mary, on the other hand, was part of like the upper echelon. She was black, but she'd never had experienced like slavery.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So he had spent some time with them, but because of the fact that the slave catchers were always on his tail, and slave catchers and bounty hunters were coming from the States to Canada and taking slaves or enslaved people and bringing them back, he didn't stay here too long. So he was always trying to move around, again, much like a spy. So yeah.
Gotcha. So he grew up a slave in, you said Missouri?
Yeah, he was born a slave.
He was born a slave.
Yeah.
And then how old was he when he committed this murder and fled?
He was like 19.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was like a teen, which I empathize with, because I had my first child when I was like 18 years old. My ex at the time was pregnant when I was 17, and I was like, my mom and I had an argument because at the time she didn't like what I was doing. I was out of the house a lot. At the time, I wanted to be in entertainment. Didn't know I was going to be an artist in the future. At the time, I was like, I want to be like the Dame Dash of like Toronto, and just like manage artists and like put them on and just kind of like be behind the scenes. So I was like out of the house a lot, spending a lot of times in like clubs, hanging out with, you know, different like musicians and celebrities. And my mom was just kind of like scared because she didn't really know what was going on. So at 17, with us having this like disagreement, she kicked me out of the house, and she didn't want anyone in my family to like take me in. So I was like exiled, and I was like kind of like crowd serving, just trying to like survive. So that's like the mind frame that I'm writing at when I'm talking about him trying to survive as he's like on the run.
Okay, that's very interesting. So did he take the Underground Railroad to get to Canada? Eventually, but the way that it started for him was he was on the run. Then he got to like Illinois. Okay.
In Illinois, there was Galesburg, and that's where he connected with the Anti-Slavery Society. The president was John Blanchard at the time, and John would have connected him to other people that were part of the Underground Railroad.
Because like this is in the 1860s.
This like at the time this was like in the 1850s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's getting towards the end of slavery at this point, right?
Yeah.
So at this point are a lot of like slavery wasn't in every state, was it?
There were some free states, but what happened was in 1850, I believe, is when they had the Fugitive Act.
Okay.
So the Fugitive Act meant like if you were an enslaved person and you left, then they can go ahead and like bring you back because you were still considered property.
Yes.
But in like 1834, that's where there was the abolishment of slavery, which meant that anyone that was
So you said 64, right?
1834.
1834.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 1834 was the abolishment of slavery. So like, let's say, for example, I had children that were born after 1834. They were not going to be slaves.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So then the Fugitive Act was like, let's say, slavery is abolished, but I'm still an enslaved person to this plantation and I choose to run away. Because of the Fugitive Act, someone can capture me and bring me back and still treat me like a slave.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if you were a slave and you were on a plantation in 1940 and you had a kid, that kid is not a slave?
In 1840.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is correct. Okay.
But they're still I'm sure they're still being treated in a very similar way.
I mean, I haven't done like extensive research to know what the descendants or the children of like slaves were like treated like, but I imagine it wasn't great. I mean, I didn't even realize this, but we actually had slavery here in Canada for over 200 years. Over here in Canada. That was something that I didn't know because a lot of people, at least from the States or even the Caribbean, would like come to Canada, right? But I didn't realize that prior to them coming to Canada that we actually had slavery over here. Like Chloe Cluey was one of the stories that I heard, and she was like an enslaved person in Canada, and she was eventually sent back. Like she was sold in the States.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of stuff happened back then. Some that's kind of even hard to, I guess, comprehend like today. About how like every person's story is probably so unique, like like we say like like after 1934 you said that they're not slaves, but these kids were probably like, who knows, like each individual story is probably so crazy, kids were probably still treated the way that they were before. People probably just ignored it. And
I'm still learning stuff. Like I had learned, someone had sent me some information that they actually had these plantations that they were just like breeding houses. Right. Wow. So basically, once a girl was like having puberty and she got like her period, she would just be in a stable just like a horse. And then the slave master would just pick someone and be like, okay, you're having a kid with her. And she would just be raped. And then every time that she had a kid, another kid, and then another kid. And then sometimes she was even raped by the slave master. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there's so many stories that haven't even been told from like the 1800s. And I'm so happy that like I found one that wasn't like super like triggering or traumatic that I can write as like a spy thriller. That hopefully it'll pique the interest of other people to go ahead and do some research and learn a little bit more about some of the stuff that happened in there.
It's so terrible. Like the way you're like 5 minutes ago when you're telling about your play, it just sounds so dark and horrible. But then you tell that story and it's like, wow, that's nothing compared to, it's crazy. Like how much worse, like you just said, like you chose this one because it's not that dark, but in its own way, it is incredibly dark,
Yeah.
It's just, there's even worse.
Oh, there's heavy stuff. Well, originally when I had written the first draft, I had gone to the Amherstburg Freedom Museum and I was learning about enslaved people, and I was learning about like trans and like gay people that were enslaved people that were black at the time. And what I had learned was that I'm not exactly sure where it took place or how many places that it took place, but there were black men that they would go ahead and they would rape, and they would call it like buck breaking. And the purpose of this was to go ahead and like break the spirit of Black men. And what people don't realize, especially like in Jamaica as an example, there's not a lot of tolerance for being gay or part of like, you know, the queer community, right? But people don't understand where that comes from. So originally, when I was writing the first draft, I wanted to try to go ahead and like implement the buck breaking so that people can get, you know, some sort of understanding on why there's like so much homophobia in different parts of like the Black community, whether it's like different parts of Africa or if it's like different parts of like the Caribbean or like South America, because there's this like thing where it's like a lot of Black people are homophobic, but some people don't understand where it comes from. And I feel like explaining like the buck breaking and some of the other stuff, tragedies that happen, that can kind of help add context.
Okay, that's very interesting. It's cool to be a writer, and even by telling true stories, you can implement things that, like your play, and this man doesn't have. Like, you didn't have to add that aspect, I don't think, if you didn't want to, but it's nice that you have the freedom to do that and to kind of tell, like, you're telling a really small story in your big story just because you wanted to, and that's really cool. Yeah,
but unfortunately, that was a story that we just didn't have, it just couldn't fit. So hopefully in the future, and I mean, maybe someone who listens to this might just beat me to it and be like, you know what, I want to go ahead and write that. And that's totally cool, because there's so many stories out there that need to be told. And sometimes I feel like, at least with the success that I've been having lately, that more people want me to do more, and I'm only one person. So more people that are able to go ahead and like tell these stories that need to be told, whether it's from, you know, the Black community, the Indigenous community, the Irish Protestant Catholic community, because they have a lot of history over here in Canada as well. There was a project that I was like researching to like write about, which was like, it involved like the KKK being here in Canada. It involved like the Donnelly massacre that happened with the Irish Catholics that they called Blackfeet. There's just so much history here in Canada that people don't even know about. And I'm just excited to just, you know, be able to tell at least one historical story that was like really impactful here.
You're telling me all these things, and it's so inspiring, and now I want to go watch and read this stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I love these stories, and I'm like, how come I don't watch it more? It's because it's so hard to watch. Like, one of my favorite movies of all time, I've seen it 3 times. I'm sure you've seen it, American History X.
Yes, I watched that in high school, and it was really cool, but it was something at the time that I watched it, I could only watch it once, because especially that curb, like when he like had it, I was like, you know what I mean? Yeah. And then also like when Edward Norton gets like raped in the prison.
You said the 2; those are the 2.
I was like,
2 scenes.
Yeah, man, it's hard. It's some deep stuff, man.
But you said you watched in high school. So my dad, he's retired now, but he was a high school teacher in Detroit for 25 years. And he used to show that. And then he started teaching in the 90s. And I think in like the early 2010s, a mom complained and he couldn't show it anymore, obviously. Yeah. Obviously, he wouldn't show those parts, but they would show it. And then they weren't allowed to show it anymore. Actually, no, I could be wrong. It could be the other story with... A Time to Kill, that's what it is. My bad. It's not American History X. It was A Time to Kill. Did you know that movie?
I don't think I watched that one.
That's where I think Matthew McConaughey's is he the lawyer?
With Samuel L. Jackson, and then he has like the younger daughter that gets raped by those guys. Yeah, and then he kills them. Yeah. I did see that one again in school.
So my apologies. It wasn't American History X. My dad used to show it was that movie.
Yeah.
And then they wouldn't let him show it anymore.
Yeah.
But another movie that's I've only seen I think once, because it's like. It's so hard to watch, but they're good to watch, you know?
Yeah. Like, I haven't watched, like, 12 Years a Slave, because just anything related to, like, transatlantic slavery, it just makes me uncomfortable. And when I was originally asked to write this theater play, or to write a theater play, I originally turned it down, because it's like, I have no experience writing for theater. I'm a screenwriter. I'm a novelist. Like, that's, like, my lane. But then Art Theater Collective, they're like, hey, we actually are going to mentor you. We're going to be with you every step of the way. I'm like, guys, I'm also like on tour. and I don't know if I have the capacity to like be in a room with you. And they're like, no, you can go ahead and do Zoom with us, and we'll work with you. We have all these historians. And I was like, yeah, but the time to research and
yeah, right? How much time to research is crazy.
I know, it's crazy. But I mean, we made it work. We made it happen. I'm really proud of the project. After we do the Capitol Theater, the plan is to go ahead and take it on a 10-city tour in the fall. So right now we're currently going through the process of like setting that up. At the Capitol Theater, we have our student show that's sold out. Over 400 students on a wait list for that. Over 1,000 tickets that are sold at the Capitol Theater. So we're on trend to sell out. So I'm really excited about this. And this is my first project that I've written for the stage and that I'm also acting in it.
It's so awesome. I'll be there for the student one. They hired me to photograph it.
Okay, cool.
So I'll be there taking pictures. I'm excited for that.
Awesome.
That's on February 27th, right?
Yes.
And then is it that evening that everybody can buy tickets for?
So that evening, I believe we have like an invite only private show. And I believe like the kids that are on the wait list, I think they're going to kind of get moved over to that show. And then there's also going to be, other grassroots communities that may not have like access, or organizations that will also be invited to that private show.
Got you.
And then what else is there? And then there's the Friday, the Saturday, and the Sunday. Everyone's asking me which is the best day to come. I think people are going to have a great time regardless. But the Friday show, while I feel it's particularly special, is the Amherstburg Freedom Museum is actually going to be bringing historical artifacts. So it'll be like an immersive experience where people are going to be able to interact with like the Prince Hall Masons, like coins and like some of the other like attire and merchandise that they have there. So I think that's going to be really cool. Plus, politicians are going to be there, red carpet, influencers, the media is going to be there. But yeah, for me, like I feel like having the full immersive experience, Friday is the best night to go.
So Friday, that's February 28th, March 1st, and then the Sunday, March 2nd. Those
Correct.
are the 3 nights that the public can go see it.
That is correct.
Got you. And the 27th is 2 private screenings.
Yeah. One for students and then one for like more community.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, which is in 2 weeks from today.
I know.
I'm gonna bust this one out. Usually we film and I put them out like 3 or 4 weeks later, but this one obviously we have to get out before that. So, that's gonna be awesome. Okay, how long ago did you start working on this project, on the play?
I think it was probably like last year May.
Okay.
So last year April is when they probably like reached out to me. Then they invited me to go to the Amherstburg Freedom Museum because I was very hesitant, and for me, I just want to put my all into every project that I work on, and I don't want to work on like anything else. Mm-hmm. So we went to the museum. I saw all this like really cool stuff. And then there was this video, and then the video had like a little clip of like John Anderson's story that like piqued my interest out of like all these other stories that were there. And I was like, you know what? I want to research this some more. And then I did a little bit of research and I was like, this is a story I want to tell.
Nice. How long is the play?
It's 2 acts. I think it's going to be about an hour and 45 minutes. Okay. It's about 72 pages. And I'm told that each page is about 2 minutes for theater. Okay. It's really cool. So it's not a musical, but we have music. Okay. Yeah, and it's very like cinematic because I'm a filmmaker. There's even like a bit of like choreography for a few scenes. And this is like beyond like the fight scenes. Okay. That are kind of cool, but it's not a musical. No one's going to be singing. But there is music and it's really cool.
How many actors are in the play?
We have a total of 16.
16. And how long have you guys been rehearsing and all that stuff for?
Oh, man. I would say we've probably been rehearsing for maybe like 6-7 weeks. Okay. Yeah. But the thing is, like, I came much later because they were auditioning for the John Anderson role. And we had some like issues with like some of the actors based on like schedule conflict, and then also based on just like Chris Rabideau, who's the director of the show, he wanted someone that was like honest and vulnerable. So for me, just as like a joke, I was like filling in for like one of the actors that we were waiting for because he was being held over at the border because he was from Detroit.
And you already know the story, so you can do that.
Yeah. So I was just like filling and joking around, and then they just saw something in me, and then they're just like, "Hey, we're 6 weeks out from the show. Would you consider accepting this role?" And then I did. So people have had a little bit longer. And again, this is my first time acting. There's no improv classes or anything like that. But I mean, I have directed or supported people with like creating their other stuff. So I have some insights, but I've never acted before. So it's been definitely like a learning experience for me.
Well, not only do you know the character, but you know the whole play better than anybody else. So that's definitely an advantage, right?
Yeah.
At least you don't have to learn about who you're playing. You just have to learn how to act now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
And you seem like you write from a very personal place. So you just you're already that person, right? So
yeah,
I'm sure that helps a bit.
For sure. I'm definitely like a method writer. So I guess, I'll probably be method acting in a sense, but I'm trying not to do that because of how close it is. So yeah.
It's awesome. That's very cool. Okay, tell me about your book. Your book is Shades of Black?
Yeah.
When did it come out?
It came out April 4th of like 2023 in Canada.
Okay.
And then in the States and I guess like everywhere else, it was available, I think it was like August 1st.
And you had a publisher for this?
Yes. So Formac Lormer is my publisher. My second book, which is currently titled Not My Crew, it's going to be coming out with them. And it's basically the sequel to the first book.
Cool. How long is the book? Like how many pages?
The first book is 148 pages, give or take. I actually wrote it for reluctant readers because, believe it or not, for some reason, people are like, "Oh, when you're a writer, you've been writing for like ever." That wasn't the case for me. I actually come from a background of having like learning challenges. So I wasn't big on reading. I wasn't big on writing. I did well in school. But because of my challenges, it just took a lot more effort for me to go ahead and like focus and to get things done. But I've only been really like reading like since I've been writing, which has been like maybe like the last 5-6 years or so. The project is about me transitioning from a predominantly white school to a predominantly black school with an elitist mentality, experiencing culture shock, trying to navigate the Crips and the Bloods in the school. This takes place in Rexdale.
Is that in Toronto?
Yeah. So while Rexdale is a community in Toronto, anyone that knows about it knows about its history of violence. I don't know what it's like today. A lot of my friends, unfortunately, or people that I knew just aren't alive. But it was a very, very violent time. I believe the Conservative Party was in office, and like black kids were always being like carded. So if you didn't have like your student card, you can very well be arrested, and you were always harassed.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm writing from that perspective.
This is Shades of Black.
This for Shades of Black, yeah.
So you're writing from your own perspective?
Yeah, I'm writing from my own perspective.
Okay.
It's a page turner. It's a crime thriller. So I'm writing it with this experience coming into this new school, new environment, a kid trying to fit in. Hip hop culture is like huge at the time.
What year?
This is like in the 2000s, the early 2000s.
Early 2000s.
So
okay.
we have like, Drake and Tory Lanez that are like kind of like on the rise, but at the time they weren't getting like a lot of respect because no one really respected Canadian artists at the time. Unless they were getting some sort of credibility from the States, and all, as far as I know, all like Canadian artists, with the exception of like Maestro West, when they went to the States, that's when they kind of became like superstars.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm writing from like that perspective, and it's like kind of like that era. But I've modernized it, and I've also fictionalized it. So a lot of names are like changed. Yeah. Okay. A lot of names are changed. The high schools changed. I went to a Catholic school, but it's like a public school in this project.
Okay. Is the climax of the book, like, is that stuff true, or is it fictionalized, or is it like semi-fiction? Like, did you?
Yeah. So it's semi-fictionalized. It's interesting because my wife was like, she's like, when you're writing this stuff, she actually had a nightmare that I got murdered for like dry snitching with like my stories.
Okay.
So I have gone ahead and I've like fictionalized it for the safety of like everyone that, you know, may have been involved in the project.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, so you were in high school. So you were in high school in the early 2000s then? Is that when it was? Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And you said, what grade were you in when you switched to this school?
So it was actually, I went from a predominantly white elementary school to a predominantly black high school.
That's what you meant. Okay.
Yeah. But like in the book, it's me transitioning from a predominantly white high school to a predominantly black high school.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Did you, when you were in elementary school in real life, did you live in the same neighborhood that you lived in when you were in high school? How come you switched schools like that?
It wasn't even like I switched schools. So I went to like St. Benedict's, which is in like South Etobicoke. And then I went to like Monsignor Percy Johnson, which is basically like right next door. Like you can walk from one school to the next school. And I lived right across. So, I mean, the audience can't see us, but you see how our water bottles are?
Yeah.
Like across from each other?
They can see.
Yeah. So this is my house.
Yeah.
And that was Johnson. So I'm at 2173 Kipling Avenue. And then there's Johnson right in front of my house. So like our Christmas lights that we would have like in our bushes always got destroyed by like the high school kids. But it was just that kind of school. Like there's so many stories and that school, like for me, it was all about surviving, not just for myself, but for many of like the black youth, the brown youth that were in there. Cause there was just a lot of like fights. There were a lot of gangs. Everybody was like clicked up. For me, by like color, I was black, but by name, I was embraced by the Latino community. You know what I mean? So it was a very interesting dynamic. And it's part of the reason why like we have like, you know, a black kid on the cover, but his name is Ramiro Mentis, which is a very Latin name. And that was important to me. Mentis is actually my biological father's last name. So I kind of add that there because I never got to take on his actual last name. So this is my way of kind of like immortalizing him.
That's very cool. Yeah, I love little things like that. That's why it's nice to have interviews because then people find that stuff out. So we had a little cut there for a second, but explain what you were going to say.
Yeah, so just talking about the elitist mentality. So the way so my parents, they come from Guyana, which is in South America.
That was my question.
Yes. That's where they come from. And in Toronto at the time, when we would see crimes, violent crimes, on the news, my family would just be like, it's the Jamaicans, or it might be, I mean, usually they would say it was like the Jamaicans, right? And then because I had that mentality from like what I heard like people from my family saying, I had this elitist mentality where I was like, we're not like them, right? So there's like black people that do this, and then there's like the Jamaicans who like do this, and they give like a bad name for like black people. And it's not just like Jamaicans, because there's good and bad in every culture. I mean, look at all the politicians that we have. But yeah, there's good and bad in like every culture, right? But there was just certain things that people in my culture, at least what was told to me from my family, that didn't do. So whenever there was stuff that was like on the news, they would be like, it was this. So going into this school with that mentality, it was definitely a learning curve, because I was friends with a lot of Jamaicans and a lot of Trinidadians and a lot of Africans, and even people from like Mexico and El Salvador and Iraq and Lebanon, because the school was very like culturally diverse. But it was also very cliquey, right? So we had Caribbean kids that stayed to themselves, and we had African kids that would stay to themselves. And there was like a divide between the Africans and the Caribbean. I mean, what I learned was part of this came from like the transatlantic slave trade, because Africans sold other Africans into slavery, which eventually came into the Caribbean, right? And there's talks about like how any other culture or community would have like rebelled and raged, like Ukraine, for example. They would have gotten together and they would have fought, but like you sold your people out, you know what I mean? So my understanding from what I heard is that's part of the reason why there was a divide culturally speaking, and where people were like, oh, we're better than, you know, that particular culture. But really we all are the same, and we're just confused, and we've just allowed like white supremacy and capitalism to just like continue to divide us. Yeah,
a lot of people like to blame other demographics for when things go wrong. Like, you know, white people, like, as you said that, like, your family used to say because they were Jamaican, but sometimes white people will say, oh, they're white trash people, or they're rednecks.
Exactly.
And it's like, you're just, like, yeah, there's good people and there's bad people.
Everywhere, with every culture, with every community.
Yeah, their background doesn't really matter. Like, if they're...
Exactly.
If they're shitty, they're shitty.
Yeah, but I mean, I learned so much, and I'm, like, still learning. Like, I learned, like, how to dance, because... whenever I would try to like embrace my Guyanese culture, my family would like mock me for like my accent. So it actually made me want it to be far away from my like culture as much as possible. And it actually led me to embracing like other cultures. So I learned how to like bubble or wine with like Jamaican girls and Trinidadian girls by going to these like parties that I would get invited to. But these parties, unfortunately, a lot of times would get shot up because of the gang violence.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was crazy, but there was so much that I learned, and I mean, it was a scary time, but it was also a really cool time as a young teen. Like, I've had like a machine gun point to my face by another kid who like looked like me. You know what I mean? Just for being at a party and being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and him not knowing, you know, what community that I'm from. Not that it mattered at the time. And from what I hear, things haven't changed much in Toronto. Wow. There's still a lot of violence, and apparently there's a lot of violence here in Windsor. I just don't really know the areas that is happening because I'm just like hyper focused on the stuff that I'm doing.
Yeah, I think Toronto and Vancouver is where it's probably like the worst in the country from things I've read online and just news and stuff. Like, that's where the like most prominent gangs are in our country, is Toronto and Vancouver.
Which is kind of interesting because like Nova Scotia, they have like a lot of stuff that's going on there, and we don't really hear about it like there. But I heard like Nova Scotia is like, at least certain parts of it are like super corrupt, because the people that you went to like school with are the people that are like working the prisons, and they're friends with them. So there's like exchanges, and there's a lot of prostitution. There's a lot of like women that come from Nova Scotia that come over to like Ontario. And I mean, from being in like Toronto, like I've been able to like see this, you know what I mean? So it's just interesting. There's so many stories. And I just kind of want to like give context to why things are like happening, because I feel like there's a lot of ignorance, but I feel like it's my job, having the knowledge that I have and having the resources and the people that I'm connected to go ahead and tell these stories so that people have a little bit more context and there's a little bit more empathy.
Yeah, Montreal is actually like crazy for gangs, and the history of gangs there is actually incredibly interesting because there's a huge connection. Like, that's where the mafia is the most prominent in our country.
Yes,
and they're like very highly connected with like the families in New York. So that's kind of like their way into our country is through that family in Montreal.
It's so cool. It's so interesting. I mean, it's also bad, but it's just interesting. And for me, like, I grew up watching like crime stories. I mean, I don't know too many people that didn't like Scarface.
Yeah.
So whenever I hear, and I loved American Gangster with Denzel Washington. I thought that was so cool. So yeah, whenever I hear about like crime stories or mobs or mafia, I love to like explore and like learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah, me too. That's my favorite history, I guess, is gangs and crime and stuff like that. It's funny. I took one drama class in high school, and we had to do a monologue, and I did American Gangster for it. But
that's cool.
That's the only time I've ever done anything drama related. Or
hey, man, I mean, this is my first time. Maybe things will change, and you'll start acting too.
Maybe. For me, I don't know. I just kind of like. Well, that's not true. I guess I was going to say I'd like to keep my creative eggs in one basket, like just kind of stick to my photography, but that's not true because I have a podcast.
Yeah, and I mean, you also do video as well. So technically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just, in my brain, it's all under one umbrella. But new things can be added under that umbrella, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But okay, so you said you're on tour. What are you touring, the book?
Yes, I've been touring the book for the last couple of years. I was in October. I was in like Atlanta, Canada.
Cool.
In November, I was in Arizona for a bit. And then I spent a little bit of time in the Caribbean. And then in December, I spent a little bit of time in Florida. And then I kind of shut down the tour because I had received a touring grant back in October while I was on tour in Atlanta, Canada, for $33,000. And I was supposed to be touring from January pretty much until like April, and then have a break. But then once I decided to commit to this like play, I kind of had to put everything on pause. So I have done a few events here and there, but like I just haven't been able to leave the province like I'm supposed to.
What do you do on these book tours? Do you just do signings? Do you do talks, or?
I do. I actually do a lot of stuff with like schools in different provinces and cities. So typically, I'll do like an assembly one day, and I'll have like as many students as I possibly can. Usually it's in like the hundreds. Then after the assembly, I'll go ahead and I'll do like workshops, like creative writing workshops.
Oh, cool.
And then usually on like weekends, I might do something with like a grassroots organization or like a bookstore where I'll do like a signing. And that's typically what my like tour consists of. But now, like, since I have like, not only do I have like films, and not only do I have like this play, my plan is to kind of like package everything and eventually just kind of like just offer all of these things at the same time.
What is the demographic of the communities that you're doing these tours in? Is it everything? Is there, is it a broad spectrum, or?
Yeah, I mean, I typically target like youth. So that's the reason why I'm usually like in the schools, and it's usually like grades like 6 all the way to like grade 12 that I'm usually targeting. But I mean, what's interesting is even though my writing like for books are for like young adults, there's a lot of like adults that are reading the project and that are enjoying it and have been pretty receptive to it.
Are you going to like, are they lower class communities, higher class communities? Is it a mix of everything?
It's a mix of everything. I am trying to see if I can get into like more remote communities, because I feel like they're the ones that don't really know too much of like the stories that I'm trying to tell. And I feel like they would be the ones that would be able to like kind of connect with it the most, especially just being someone who I feel like everyone's always trying to fit in. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I feel like even like the popular kids, whoever they may be, are not like fully secure with themselves because they're trying to do whatever they can to kind of like stay popular in a sense. And I think that's kind of why like some bullies are like formed.
Yeah.
You know?
No, for sure. That's really cool. So, so you're mostly like on this tour, I guess it makes most sense. Economically, you're sticking to bigger cities, bigger areas.
Yeah. Cool. So like if I'm in New Brunswick, it'll be like maybe like Fredericton, St. John, Sussex, Moncton, Nova Scotia, maybe North Preston, Halifax.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
That's really cool. How do you like traveling like that? Is it fun?
Honestly, as a kid, I've always wanted to see Canada, especially like learning about geography, and like just being able to go on tour with the book has been an opportunity for me to see Canada. And I just want to like see more of it, and I want to learn more and more about like our history here.
Now that you mentioned that, and you're touring across Canada, and the themes of your current projects are Black themes, but they're also about minorities. Have you ever thought about doing something with the Indigenous community?
Oh yeah, I actually had spoken to Elise Harding Davis, and I had asked her. I was like, "Has there ever been a time where like Black folks and Indigenous folks have like got together in some sort of like rebellion? Because if that has happened, I would love to like learn about that and like write a project on that. And I think it'd be a great way to kind of like bring us together. So yeah, I'm totally interested in doing stuff with the Indigenous community and learning more about the Indigenous community. I'm also interested in just like supporting someone from the Indigenous community and helping them tell their story. Since I kind of like have, I have these resources, I have a little bit of like, influence in terms of like helping people get projects greenlit.
It's crazy how close these communities are to the rest of the province and the rest of the country, but how far away they make them feel. Like Walpole Island is so close. My best friend, his fiance is a teacher there. She's a grade school teacher. Well, she taught the last 2 years, and then this year she's back just working here, only because she loves teaching there, but that's a lot every day. It's far away. But she worked there, and the stories she has to tell her are just crazy, like how different things are, just because of this like imaginary line of this land that Canada let them keep, just this small little community. Like the stories that can be told from these people must be incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know anything about like the residential schools until like, I guess like the whole world found out about the residential schools.
The grades and everything.
Yeah. And I feel apparently they're still finding bodies of these like kids. So I think there's so much. And I was on CJAM and I was talking to the radio host there, Tony, and he was telling me how Tecumseh, how he's like, do you know anything about Tecumseh? And he's like, you've seen that indigenous man who's a chief when you come into like the city of Tecumseh on the highway. And I mean, like, yes, I've seen, but I mean, like, I haven't like made time to go ahead and like research who they are or what they've done. And he was telling me that he was told from indigenous leaders, and he's like, you should go ahead and do your research. And he's like, how he's still doing research, but he was told that that person was a sellout, and how a lot of people in the indigenous community, they don't necessarily respect him because he had sold out in order to, I guess, like work with different like politicians at the time.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's interesting. But again, there's so much that I don't know. And there's so much that I want to learn about.
Curiosity's the way to do it.
Yeah, man.
So the band, The Tragically Hip, I don't know if you know them. They're from Kingston, very Canadian band. The lead singer, Gord Downey, was more of a poet than a singer. All their songs are about Canada most of them are about Canada in some way or another. And he was very, very passionate about the Indigenous community and those residential schools and like justice for them and all that stuff. He died of brain cancer like 5 years ago. But he had some pretty serious meetings with Trudeau before he died. And Trudeau was a big fan of him and his band because he's kind of from that era. Like they were like late 80s and 90s was when they were really famous.
Got it.
And Trudeau made a promise to him to do things. And I haven't followed it too much, but from what I understand, Trudeau has been doing stuff because that was Gord Downey's like passion project was like support for the Indigenous communities now because like it's so bad for them now. Like, you know, it's not like it's done yet, you know?
I know. I mean, like for me, I kind of see myself as a liberator. I feel like, you know, the 1% that has like all the wealth and all the power, how they've turn like the 99% against each other. So for me, I'm really hoping to find a way to unite the 99% so that we can just kind of like take over. I don't believe that our government is meeting our expectations, and I believe that we're too dependent on them. I believe that we need to be like our own saviors, and whatever I can do to just like help bring the 99% together so that we can be our own saviors, I just think that it can make a real big change.
Yeah, and I think Canada's the country to do it. Most diverse country in the world, right? Like Toronto's the most diverse city in the world. We have people from everywhere.
Yeah.
And a lot of us grew up, like, I know you said your school was very rough and predominantly a black school, but a lot of the country, like when I was in high school, like my friends, we were like the United Nations, like me and my best friends, like we had somebody from everywhere. But they're all like second or third generation. You don't even like see the culture anymore. The only reason we know is because like their grandparents are, you know, from a different country and speak a different language, and they all look different. Everybody's a different color of skin, but like we're all the exact same. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, did the same things. And it was kind of funny, like we would all be out places like, and like we would go to the States and go on trips together and look around. And a lot of times people do like click with their group, right? And I'd be like, man, we look funny sometimes, eh? Like we got somebody from everywhere. People are probably like looking at us like, but I was like, I don't even like see you guys as different ethnicities. Like you're just my friends. Like, I don't know, you kind of get blinded to it. And I think that's a good thing about Canada and how diverse we are, that a lot of people did grow up like that, right?
Yeah, I feel like it was like that for me too when I was in like elementary school, because I had like my Vietnamese best friend Ryan Novu, and I had my Filipino best friend Anthony Gia, and then I had like Mark Golding, who was like Jamaican, and yeah, again we were just like people from, and then we had like Nick Pantalone, who was like Italian, and we were just like the United Colors of Benetton. You know what I mean? We were all different like shades, and we liked basketball. We would play, we'd play like street hockey on like rollerblades or foot hockey. And then high school was just like, some of us went to the same high school. So it was just, I mean, I don't even know what it was like for them, just kind of watching me, just kind of like the influence, and then slowly just having me kind of like wrapped. I have no idea what it was like. And then obviously over time, we became more like distant, and we went off to like different colleges and stuff. But yeah, man, I think elementary school was like, I don't know what it's like in Windsor for like high school. Maybe it was similar to like what it was like, because I don't know if there's any school that has like a large Black population in Windsor. But I know in Toronto, there's a few schools where it's like, those are Black schools.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I would say my high school was mostly, I would say, like the larger population was white and Middle Eastern.
Okay.
Just because of but we did have everything. Like when I say all my friends, like we were all like, those were high school friends.
Yeah.
And you know, one was Black, one was Indian, one was Lebanese. Like it was literally just one from everywhere.
Yeah.
But I would say like most of the school was white and Middle Eastern.
What high school did you go to?
I went to Holy Names.
Okay.
So it's a Catholic school, but it's next door to the mosque.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of Muslims and Middle Easterns go there, but a lot of the Middle Eastern kids that went there were Chaldean though.
Okay.
So Catholic.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of Muslims for a Catholic school just because it was right next door to the mosque.
Yeah.
So I think it was just like, that's where they lived, and
Yeah.
it was just kind of easy.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of culture at our school though.
That's cool.
We're kind of in the middle, like it's only a few blocks from here. So we're more like kind of central. It's in between like poor kids went there, rich kids went there, kids from the middle went there.
Okay.
Just because kind of where it is, like which is where it sits. Like people just came from everywhere.
Yeah.
All different neighborhoods. It was good. It was a good school for that, I find. Like,
but was it like a safe like school? Because
Yeah.
Cool. Because I've heard some stories of like some schools in Windsor where someone told me that the kids are like stab crazy.
So some kids
Like central. But I don't know which central or how many central schools there are, but like that was like a name of a school that like came up where the kids over there are like stab crazy. I also heard that like Massey is also like a troubled, like has quite a bit of like troubled youth at that school as well.
Really?
That's just what I heard.
I've
I
been
haven't
in high
been
school
there
for a long time. But
yeah, I mean, I have kids that are in high school,
Oh, cool.
and like whenever we play basketball at like Weigel Park in like the summertime, and there's like other kids from other schools that are there, and you know they just tell me things.
Massey's a good. I mean, Holy Names is a good school. It's a pretty good safe school. But there was still like there was a stabbing when I was in grade 9. Grade 10 got stabbed, and when I was in grade 10 there was another stabbing, but they weren't students at the school.
Okay.
And then that was it. There was nothing else.
I hope they lived.
They did. They was okay.
Good.
Yeah, they were both. Well, the ones when I was in grade 10, I think they were like in college or university, and they stabbed each other. Like somebody stabbed one in the parking lot. So they weren't students. So it kind of just was like they were adults out of high school. It was fucking weird. But when I was in grade 9, that stabbing, they were kids. He was like in grade 10. He was okay.
Yeah.
It was like, I think he got stabbed in his arm or something. He was fine.
Yeah.
Thank God. But yeah, besides that, I don't remember too much violence like that, especially at school.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't even know what schools like. Some of like the richer schools were bad when I was in high school too. Yeah, like they had money. Bad for drugs.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But is it like antidepressant drugs, or is it more like street drugs, like cocaine?
Yeah, like cocaine and stuff like that. Like when I was in high school, like nobody was that I knew was doing hard drugs like that.
Yeah.
But I remember that kids from those schools I would hear were doing things like that, which was always interesting. I don't know. Our school was a big cult, like I said, like it was a mix, like economically.
Yeah.
Which I think was cool because it really like balanced it out. You know?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, when I went to school, like weed was the thing, and that was like illegal at the time, right? So like weed was like stuff that like people would like sell. And I talk about that in the second book, a little bit of like the turf wars that are kind of going on. But I modernize it because now I know that kids are like doing like edibles in high school.
I wonder, like that was the only drug that I knew of being around when I was in high school was just weed.
Yeah.
Just weed. Like,
Yeah.
Nobody was doing anything else. But now, who knows? I don't know. My little sisters are in high school.
Okay. They go to the same school as you?
They do.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't know. They're good kids.
That's good.
And they're girls. Not as much violence around girls too.
Yeah.
Like they play sports. Like
that's good.
One's on the basketball team and stuff. So
that's cool.
Those kids are usually away from from that stuff more, especially when they're girls.
Yes.
But no, like what's always been dangerous in high school was like going to like football games when other schools were all together. That's when bad stuff would happen.
Oh man, I was actually talking to my cousin. And she coaches, she's a teacher, but she also coaches like the boys basketball team. And one of her kids, because of like where he lives and like, I guess like his influences, he can't go to every single basketball team. And I remember what that was like because going to school in Rexdale, like you couldn't go to certain communities and play basketball because your life was literally at risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just interesting because I've graduated 2005. It's been like 20 years, right? Since I've been in high school.
Yeah.
Man, it feels crazy just saying that. Yeah. So it's been like 20 years since I've been in like high school, give or take.
Yeah, I've been 12. It sounds nuts.
Yeah. And the fact that like that stuff's still happening, it's just like, it boggles my mind. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is crazy. Actually, my sisters, cause they play sports. So, and her boyfriend plays football, so we go watch him play sometimes. And there was a big fight at one of the games at the start of the season. My dad, like I said, he's a retired teacher.
Yeah.
He subs in the Catholic board here.
Okay.
So he's still a teacher over here, and he told me that the principal of the school made a rule for the rest of the year for all the sports that you could only go if you showed a student card from the school that was playing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you weren't allowed to go if you don't go to that school.
Crazy times, man.
Because it was nuts. Like my dad said he was at the game and there was like 1,000 high school kids and there was like a principal with a walkie-talkie. Like, were you in charge of all these kids at night? You can't do that. Like, there was like one cop there. Like, it's too much. You can't handle that,
Yeah, it's just not feasible. And I know what it's like because back in my days in high school, it's just crazy.
Yeah, for sure. So I think what I want to end it on is your second book.
Yeah.
You said you're currently writing it?
Oh man. So I've written like 15 drafts of this book and I think maybe like 3 drafts have been like a completely brand new book. The owner of the publishing company I guess we have like some creative differences, to put it politely. So I don't know when the second book is going to come out. Okay. It was supposed to come out last year during February. And then it just kept being like pushed. And there's a date online for the book. But I think it's just a placeholder date. My editor and all the editors of the publisher that I had spoken to, they said that they love what they've read. But at the end of the day, he's the goalie. Mm-hmm. That we need to slide the puck through in order for it to actually work. So we'll wait and see what he says. But hopefully I hear back soon because I had sent them draft 15. I think it was like January 25th. How
big of a change is it from draft 1?
Oh, it's like the story has changed 3 times.
Wow.
Like I have enough material where I can actually, like once they're like, yeah, we want to go ahead and go with draft 15. This is the book. We're going to go through copy editing, proofreading, and we're going to pick a cover. I can literally use like draft 13 and I can post that or I get it published with another publisher because it's literally a completely different book. Even like draft 1, I can publish it with another publisher.
Wow.
Yeah, I can do an audiobook on my own. I just need them to go ahead and commit to one so that I can make the decision on what I'm going to do with the other books.
It's that different?
It's that different.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work to rewrite them, is it not?
It is, but I'm a very fast writer. So my first book, when I wrote that, it was like 40,000 words in like 3 weeks.
Okay.
And then with the second book, like I've always written books ahead of like the release date. So like I wait for them to be like, yes, we're going to go with that book. And then once they're like, yeah, we're going with that book, I already start drafting the next book, waiting for them to be like, okay, because they don't have the bandwidth to keep up with me as a writer because I just write too fast. So that's why now I've been talking to like other publishers so that I have, you know, more people that can support me with how fast I'm able to churn out books. And that's why like when I was ghostwriting, I can keep up with like ghostwriting and like writing my own stuff.
Man, writing books with so many historical elements must really slow you down though, with having to like fact check these things and do your research, right?
Yeah. And that's what it's going to take with this John Anderson story. Once I turn it into a book, I mean, with the publisher, they said it's going to be about 12, 18 months. But I'm really adapting the play into a book. So a lot of the work has already been done. I don't think it'll take me long. I've just taken a break from writing everything because I just want to focus on like acting. And then once this is done, then I'm going to get back into like writing. I have another 2 plays that I have committed to for ACT.
Cool.
So the second one is actually going to be social justice theme. It might be kind of like something off of like Shades of Black, or the Shades of Black like series that I'm writing, because it'll be related to like gangs. My vision for it was I wanted to kind of be like a modern day version of like West Side Story, which is like a modern day version of Romeo and Juliet. And I wanted to tap into like the musical, but I wanted to be like hip hop and like R&B, and I don't want it to be corny at all. So it might take some extra time, but it's supposed to come out next year in March. So We'll see what happens.
What's your favorite kind of music?
It just kind of depends on like where I'm at. But I've listened to country, hip hop is really big, trap. Like I have my toxic music times where I'm listening to like, you know, Future or Drake. There's like times where I'm like a little bit more cautious, and I'm listening to like Kendrick or like Nas. Sometimes I want to listen to something a little bit like older, like Jay-Z, and it'll take me back to those days. Kanye sometimes. Gospel music sometimes. It just kind of depends on just where I'm at.
Did you like Beyonce's country album? Did you listen to it?
I actually never took it in, but my wife is a huge fan. So I have listened to some of it, but like for me, when I'm listening to like music from artists, I like to like really like to like ignore the whole entire world, take in like lyric for lyric what they're saying, listen to like the actual like instrumentals, how things are mixing and mastered, the music that they're sampling it from. Sometimes I'll even go and like take a step and like listen to that song to hear like where it came from. So for me, it's like it's a whole process. Like when I'm like really taking in an artist's, because there's a lot of work that goes into making art, and I feel like the average consumer, they just like listen to it and then it's like on to the next. But I really try to like take in that artist and what they're trying to say.
Where is your book, Shades of Black, available?
So it's available everywhere books are sold. Amazon had just restocked because we were just sold out a few weeks ago, and there was like I think there was like a 4 to 6 week like wait, and then as soon as it came back in stock, it was like number 12. Okay. Yeah, so that was a pretty good like cool. That was pretty cool for me. The best that the book has ever done was like number 2 on like the bestsellers list. So that was really cool for me.
Yeah, that is really cool.
But like I think like Indigo at Devonshire has like one copy left, and then I think the other Indigo that we have in Windsor, I don't know where. I think it's like St. Clair.
St. Clair Shores, but it's off Manning.
Yeah, so I think they may have like 6 copies left, but like most bookstores are like sold out. Okay, like across Canada.
That's great.
Yeah.
And it's been out for almost 2 years.
Yeah, and it's been out for almost 2 years. And I imagine that as soon as the second one drops, whenever that is, I'm hoping it's sometime this year, but I'm not saying anything about the date because I don't know what the publisher is going to say. So, but I know that as soon as that book comes out, like the sales for the first book are going to continue to spike. Then I know the first book actually sold out in the pre-orders.
Nice.
Yeah. So when it actually came, when it was available for pre-order and the book came out, no one was able to get any copies for 4 to 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Who does all that work? The publisher?
I would imagine so, because the thing is, the communication with them, it just hasn't been clear. And again, I'm being as polite as I can. So I didn't know, it wasn't like 100% clear to me when the book was coming out, how much of a print run we had. So there's a lot of information that I found because other people are like, hey, we're trying to get your book and it's saying that it's like sold out. And that's how I knew it was sold out. And then I reached out to the publisher and like, yeah, it's on back order right now. Amazon just ordered like they just got like a huge bulk order. So hopefully within the next, couple of weeks. And then every time it's sold, we went through like 42 print runs last year.
Wow.
And I was like, you guys need to do a little bit better with the demand. I mean, I know like you guys have been selling books for a long time, but just as an artist who's like working with you guys and getting feedback from people in like London, England who want to read my book and they're like, hey, it's sold out. How do we get access to it? I think you guys just need to, work a little bit better with your distribution. So hopefully they'll figure things out.
That's cool though, to hear this stuff from like the logistics side.
Yeah.
What do you write on? Do you type it on a laptop?
Yeah. I'm definitely not a pen and like paper type of person.
And you seem like you write too fast to do that.
Yeah. So definitely laptop. I always use Google Docs.
I was gonna ask that too.
Yeah, because sometimes I'll write on my phone. I'll be inspired and I'm in the car if my wife's driving, and I'll just start writing something on my phone. So yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So you said that you're gonna do this play, The Price of Freedom. So you're the original, like the initial plays, the opening weekend is in Windsor at the Capitol Theater.
Yeah.
But no other dates are announced yet for when you guys want to move it around.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. We might do some stuff in the fall. Right now, we're kind of like figuring out the touring schedule, and we're kind of confirming things with like some other venues. We're planning on partnering with a lot of schools because for me, when I was growing up, when it came to like Black history or just learning about like the transatlantic slave trade, there were a lot of like gaps, and there was a lot of things that weren't taught to us. So again, wanting to be my own savior and trying to like make an impact for my own community, I'm just taking the accountability from them, and I'm just doing my part by like creating the content and just making sure that it fits with the curriculum, so that way it's more digestible and entertaining.
That's awesome. I think that's a great place to end it. So we kind of just ran through where everybody can get your stuff, but yes, Carlos Anthony, artist, overall umbrella. Thank you very much for coming on. It was nice to meet you. And thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
For sure.
I like your music.
Thanks.
Yeah, man. That's cool. Did you do that yourself?
No, I bought it. Like when I started the podcast.
Okay, cool, man.
Yeah.